Hello and welcome to the Last Mixtape Podcast. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we review Father John Misty's brand new album Mahashmashana and the latest music from the week that was. But first, where id is, there shall be ego. The words of Sigmund Freud. Why, Stephen? I hear you ask, dear listener and dear viewer. Are you quoting late 19th century and early 20th century founder of psychoanalysis Sigmund Freud at the beginning of this week's podcast? Well, dear listener and dear viewer, this week I shall be reviewing the brand new album from Father John Misty Mahashmashana, and it will all become very clear very soon. Now, disclaimer, as always at the start of this podcast, this is very much a vibes music podcast. The reviews are done a little bit differently here, so we don't go into numbers and this track good, this track bad, and blah, blah, blah. This is all done really kind of on vibes, on kind of art theory, some theory to do with the social aspects of an album or the artistic aspects of an album. So that's what we're going to be diving into here. My own history with Father John Misty, well, I am a fan. I first kind of became aware of him with his sophomore record. Obviously, he was in Fleet Foxes, but his solo career as Father John Misty, Joshua Tillman, through his record I Love You Honey Bear. And the song Chateau Lobby Number 4, a local DJ, Paul McLoone, used to play quite a bit of this record, and I really fell in love with that record, especially through that song and the lyrical essayist form that he took, and the kind of the freedom of it, and the freedom of that record. You know, stuff like, I want to take you in the kitchen, hitch up your wedding skirt. Someone was probably murdered in, which is just this amazing tapestry of words that was at play at that record. And yeah, I really loved it. I went back and listened to Fear Fun, his debut record, which had I'm writing a novel in it, which I absolutely love again, playing into that kind of freedom and that kind of danger that was in the lyrics. The following two albums, Pure Comedy and God's Favorite Customer, kind of lost me a little bit. I liked them, sure enough, but not as much as I did the first two, and got me back then with Chloe and the Next 20th Century with the kind of Scott Walker sound of it. Now, why are we talking about the id? Well, Father John Misty, the character, and this plays into this record Mahashmashana quite interestingly, because the title of the track in Sanskrit, it is meaning of great cremation ground, and there is kind of rumblings about whether or not this record will be Joshua Tillman's last as the Father John Misty persona. And it's kind of, when you look back on the records like I Love You Honey Bear, Fear Fun more specifically, that you can see that they're the embodiment of the id, that kind of impulsiveness, that kind of rawness, that sexuality, that sensuality, that kind of taking everything in. Like there's a lot of his songs that go to excess and enjoying excess and the coming down off excess and then going into excess again, and the rawness and the self-loathing, the self-hurt and self-harm and the enjoyment of all those things, and even I Love You Honey Bear goes to like impulsive thoughts or thoughts that he would have, very honest thoughts that he had about his relationship at the time. And Fear Fun is almost an album that's very honest about himself as who he is as an artist, and what is he trying to do, and what is he trying to create, and is he real, is he a fake? And I think creating the Father John Misty character and being the id, being that character, being that able to say all of these things kind of was freeing. It's interesting then that we come to what could be the end of it, and it's the idea of whether or not it is sustainable to be artistically and personally, and I'm sure it bleeds in, the id, to do things on impulse, to live a life at that kind of fast kind of pace, to kind of have that sort of carnage. And we'll talk a little bit about it later, but like it's almost that like the Nick Cave thing of kind of cannibalizing your life in order to make art out of it. And is that a sustainable thing to do? And whether or not Mahashmashana is an elegy to what was the Father John Misty character, or he may continue on to make records in this vein and in this persona, which it's interesting to whether or not you hope he does. Where like, what is a Joshua Tillman record? Or maybe to him, who is Joshua Tillman, in relation to the record. It's interesting that in several of his songs, over several of the records, he refers to Josh Tillman as someone else. That the Father John Misty character is talking about Joshua Tillman. Obviously, we as the viewer or the listener know that he's talking about himself. So there's a metaphysical element to that we are in on the idea that we know that the narrator is an unreliable narrator. Father John Misty is Josh Tillman, and when he's talking about Josh Tillman, he's talking about himself. But it's interesting that he uses the third person to refer to himself. Again, playing into that idea of the id, and the idea that wherever the id is, there shall be ego. And indeed, I think he speaks about this album as kind of the death of many different egos going into this record. Did I like this album? I suppose as we get into it, yes, I did. I really, really loved this album, and I think it brings me back. As I say, kind of lost me on God's Favorite Customer and Pure Comedy. I liked them as albums. I felt they didn't have the verve or the feel of the first two. I think Fear Fun is so raw and kind of loose, whereas I Love You Honey Bear is far different record. And I think more psychedelic, more essayist in his writing. He's quite essayist in what he does, and I think he returns to some elements of that, whilst also keeping elements, I think, of Chloe in the 20th Century, which I did say brought me back there, but I think he melds so much of it. It's interesting as well that the album begins with the title track, Mahashmashana, as we say, is Sanskrit for the Great Cremation Ground, and it is a 10-minute long epic, which is complete kitchen sink soap opera melodrama as a track, and that's what Father John Misty does probably better than anyone else right now, maybe with the Lana Del Rey as also somebody who kind of delves into the almost like, I die Horatio ness of their lyrics, that they really go in for that. And that can also be a part of the id, that kind of like the everything centers around themselves, and everything is this, oh my God, And this song is 10 minutes long, and it just puts everything out there, and it plays along a lot more with Chloe in the 20th Century in terms of the orchestration. It has that Scott Walker-esque kind of like croonerism to it that he's fallen into, which is absolutely amazing. And it also plays into the idea of the record of where do you go from here when your title of your album Mahashmashana, which is the Great Cremation Ground, to 10-minute long song opener. Well, where do you go? Where does Joshua Tillman go? Where does Father John Misty go? So, they go to She Cleans Up, which is this kind of swampy blues track, which for me really plays back into Fear Fun and the second album, Honey Bear, and I love that one as well. And again, it melds religious imagery with sexuality, with sensuality, this kind of idea of Mary Magdalene, kind of nobody touches my baby, about Jesus. And he's so good, I think, Father John Misty, and that, I always think of like the idea of I'm writing a novel. He is very much, and I think not the first to say this, that he very much has that American essayist feel to him. Almost, I think almost akin to, more than anyone, quite strangely, is Anthony Bourdain. I think his writing has a bit of that, where it's so raw, it's so honest about the narrator's own excesses, the narrator's own failings, but also has that wry sense of humor, that kind of cultural and self and relationship critique of the self that Bourdain had in his writing as well. And I'm also a massive fan of his work. Indeed, I have a tattoo that references it. So I think She Cleans Up brings it into that swampiness, where I think, again, God's Creation and Pure Comedy didn't have for me. And we go on then as well to Josh Tillman and the accidental dose. And again, the idea of the third person, Josh Tillman, being this other person who did this other thing. The line about treating his acid with anxiety, kind of self-medicating. And the world that inhabits, and the consequences therein for Josh Tillman, as kind of Father John Misty cuts this wry kind of, again, this essayist character, almost documenting Josh Tillman as another person. And it plays again into that idea of whether or not that is sustainable as a person, as an artist, whether or not you can do these things. We've talked on many occasions, we're talking about Tyler, the Creator, only recently, about the death of his own personas before his most recent record. And we've talked about David Bowie, a character who would kill his own personas on stage, famously with Ziggy Stardust. This one's a little bit different because all both Tyler the Creator and David Bowie released their albums as their own monikers. Obviously, David Bowie isn't his real name, and Tyler the Creator is not the real name, but Father John Misty is very much a moniker. Josh Tillman is the name of the person. Screamland on the track as well, on the album, is probably my favorite track of it, and that plays mostly into the primal scream idea, which is where the kind of the idea of the id, the primality of it, the impulsiveness of it, the Freudianness of the record kind of comes in for me, and the idea of what is it about us that draws us to these characters. It's raw. It has this distorted nature to it. All the songs feel like they build and build and build into this. At any moment, could come unglued and unstuck, and it adds that element of danger. That although I loved Chloe in the 20th Century, and I loved the first two records, I felt in kind of in between there wasn't that element of danger to him. That when you go see him live, and when I saw him live in the Ivy Gardens in Ireland, in Dublin, the last time he was here, there is a danger to him. There is a sexuality to him. There's a sensuality to him. The way he performs, the way he moves on stage, you can see why people are drawn to it. And She Cleans Up and Screamland really play into that. It's interesting that it kind of, I guess, Time Makes Fools of Us All is this almost pastiche of a funk R&B track. I think there's a self-referentialness to it. There's this kind of self-reflectiveness on that type of music, on his own kind of impulse and reliance therein. And I think it's a fun track, and making a fun track for the sake of it as well. And I think he plays it really well, and you can see that he's a person whose musical taste and kind of magpie-like nature of taking music kind of follows through. And then we end obviously with Summer's Gone, which is this kind of ballad lament. And this is probably in where you can feel that maybe this is a goodbye to Father John Misty, that and those days are gone now. And the battle in, the id itself not wanting to die, the ego itself not knowing if it can survive, or maybe not even knowing if it can survive the commentary of Father John Misty. As I say, he refers to Josh Tillman many times. But this is not a psychoanalysis in any way of him as an artist, but it is interesting to see how he plays with these things. Other musicians who embody this, again, I mentioned Nick Cave. When you go see him live, he has this almost preacher-like nature. Also a very tall man who can move around in a suit and kind of capture people's imagination and command the stage and talk about things that feel gritty and grotty and dirty, and it feels amazing to watch it. And I think that's why we are drawn to these characters, why we are drawn to Father John Misty or a Nick Cave or a Lana Del Rey, as I say, that kind of impulsiveness, not just in a sexual sense, but the impulsiveness of wanting to be melodramatic, as I say about the opening track, of wanting to kind of have that kind of soap opera nature to ourselves, to giving into those impulses, to allowing those thoughts to be free. And how freeing that must be, but how exhausting that can also be to yourself. And it's interesting that in ways he references it as kind of the death of many egos, and how many deaths of many egos goes through to make this an album and make this record something that he lays it all bare in. Musically and lyrically, here on this record, Father John Misty is at, back to his best of those earlier records and Chloe in moments. Also melding them all into a kind of a snapshot, a journey through the life of Father John Misty musically in ways. There are those moments that harken back and then into the middle and into the end. The gradual twist into the Scott Walker of it all, into that kind of grandiose pop that we obviously see with the Arctic Monkeys have most recently done a couple of records where you feel that that's shifted into it, but also the kind of keeping the swampiness to it, the indie folk, the bluesiness to it that were in these other records, and the sense of adventure, the sense of vivid sonic landscapes that he would create, the kitchen sink nature sometimes of his writing, both thematically and sonically, is there in Mahashmashana. And I think it really plays as to one of his best records under the Father John Misty moniker. I would probably put it number 2 under I Love You, and just above Fear Fun for me at the moment. I really enjoyed this record. I really enjoyed it as listening to it through maybe what that meaning is. Is this the end? Is this the great cremation ground of Father John Misty? Now, it may just be that he liked the musicality of the name. He liked the musicality of the meaning. Perhaps he will come out with another record as Father John Misty, or perhaps he will tilt into the Josh Tillman of it all, and Josh Tillman will no longer be a third person character in the albums, but the character himself. And maybe that is the death of the ego. Maybe the death of the ego in here is the death of Father John Misty. An incredible record by an incredible songwriter. And again, you can see why people are drawn to him and his records. Is this the end for Father John Misty? I don't think so. Certainly won't be the end for Josh Tillman and releasing records, but if it is the great cremation ground, and this is the the death of the ego, and where the id is, the ego shall be, what an end it is, and what a great record by Father John Misty. Mahashmashana. It is out now. What did you think? Yes, dear listener, they seek him here, they seek him there, those musos seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven, or is he at the disco? The damned elusive Count of Monte Playlist, oh yes! The style and profile limousine ride jet flying, playlist making son of a gun has once again returned from the shores of Playlistia to bring you another beautiful bounty in the form of TLMT's Irish mixtape on Spotify. Let us do this with The Murder Capital and their brand new single Words Lost Meaning, coming from the brand new album coming up, Blindness. And I really liked the first kind of cut and look into this album that we got most recently, and I absolutely adored this as well. Dark, fuzzy, snarled, nasty kind of song, kind of loose, and also has an abstraction to him. What I really like about the current releases from the Murder Capital is a real definition of self, a real definition of style, and a real definition of artistic characterization. They're really coming into a sound that's their own, their kind of, as I said, snarl kind of version of their music, and really moving away from other elements and kind of creating and forming their own path. And I really like this. Words Lost Meaning is a really interesting name to it. And as well, what I like about it is like the artwork has that abstraction to it, has a kind of a formlessness to it. It kind of like hidden through the kind of the sonic realms. And what I really like about it is that raw nature to it. It has a more impactful, it has a more raw kind of feel. And yeah, I'm really liking what I'm hearing from the Murder Capital at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to this album, Blindness. It'll be out very soon, I'm sure. But that is the first track from it, Words Lost Meaning. Check it out. It's on the playlist. You can check it out wherever you want to check things out. Up next, though, we have Queen Bitch with Fool of Me, a second single from Queen Bitch. I imagine taking the name from the famed David Bowie track. And indeed, this has a little bit of that big rock sound to it. A little bit glammy in places, but also very rock and roll with a kind of a scattered beat. And it has a bit of that, has a bit of 90s alt rock to it as well. There's a real kind of modernity to it in how it kind of rests itself on that kind of, as I say, kind of a scattered beat, kind of a moving kind of type thing, but it puts that kind of rock and roll bedrock down, has a commanding central vocal to it that you just go, yeah, I'm in for this. Really like this. Smiled from the moment I heard it and said, this is going on the playlist, and indeed it is on it. It is Queen Bitch and their brand new single, Fool of Me. Check it out. It's on the playlist. Also check them out as well, wherever you want to check them out, however you want to do it. Up next, though, we have Vera, their brand new single, Lo-Fi. We have covered Vera on the playlist. Those before, The Count. This one is very interesting. Really like this one. Dreamlike in nature, cinematic in scope, and has a little bit of like something you'd hear from a David Lynch movie to it, playing into that kind of lo-fi feel, and the commanding vocal as well. Plays again into almost something like, Patti Smith meets David Lynch to it. And I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the atmospheric, thematic, textural, and sonic work that went into this, because it takes work to make a sound like this seem like you're not being, just lazy and throwaway, and that you're doing something that has meaning and sonic meaning and thematic meaning to it. And indeed, they tie all those bits together, does Vera, in this brand new single, Lo-Fi. Check it out. It's on the playlist. Check them out as well. Up next, 10 Hail Marys and their brand new single, I Still See Your Face. Yeah, very interesting. Indie gem, jangle and melody, very fully formed as well as we go to kind of the form of music itself. And this is, yeah, these guys really hitting the genre expectations and really hitting their own as well and playing a music that has, as I say, that indie gem feel to it. And they're a band that are kind of delivering that. I really liked it. Yeah, I Still See Your Face. As I say, it kind of plays into those tropes and those things that you would expect from the genre and plays into them. And yeah, really well produced stuff from them. 10 Hail Marys, check it out. Up next, Laura Elizabeth Hughes, Swear to God is the name of the single. And this is beautifully done. Laura, who is a songwriter I've been following for quite some time, writing about here on the last mixtape and now talking about on the playlist and on the videos. And it's very interesting to see how she has come back with a sound that when it begins, you're kind of like, oh, we're kind of in the realms of kind of some of her earlier work, some of the stuff that I'd heard before. And then it opens up and it unfolds into a quite a big sound and quite a well-produced sound. And her songwriting has really kind of found a sonic motif or a palette to play across. And she makes the absolute most of it on Swear to God, because as I say, doesn't go all in at once, lets the music and the song introduce itself into the world of the songwriting. And her music is beautifully done, and a great hushed vocal that, as I say, really calls attention to itself by being hushed and really kind of pulling you into its world, which I love when artists do that. Up next, though, that was Laura Elizabeth Hughes. I swear to God, it's on the playlist. But up next, 2 tracks coming up, and let us not say that the Count of Monty playlist, though, has not got Christmas cheer, dear listener. Indeed, the Count does love lights and other things and Christmassy things. And indeed, we have 2 tracks coming up because 'tis the season. They're coming out. The tracks are coming out now. Row is up next with Christmas Once Again from Row, and we've been covering Row in the last few weeks with new songs, new kind of jangle, kind of more moving into the rockier element of her music, and this kind of plays into that with a Christmas feel to it. It's a jangle tune. It has that expressionistic lyricism that is within Row's music, that kind of introspective nature to it, but also it's lovingly produced. It plays into the tropes that Christmas Once Again would play into, and doesn't come off as kind of cheesy or anything like that. It does kind of find that nice home in a song that is based around that time of year rather than written for that time of year. And yeah, some great songwriting once again by Row and her Christmas effort. Christmas Once Again, do check it out. I think it's quite beautifully released, and I hope it gets airplay. I hope to hear it. Hope to hear it whilst walking around the Christmas lights of Dublin, as the Count does like to strut around Dublin town. Up next, though, and finally, we have the return of Lisa Hannigan with Lux Alma, and they're offering Christmas FM. And I really like this. This one really brought a smile to my face, because this one goes for the pastiches, goes for the genre expectations, lyrically as well, makes a reference to these types of things, and no better people for it to play into that. I think Lisa Hannigan almost has a voice made for the kind of a Christmas tune. I'm surprised it hasn't happened before. Maybe it has, I'm not entirely sure. And Lux Alma also combining to create a great song that, yeah, just, it is unashamedly what they're trying to do is kind of give that kind of Christmas feel, give that kind of Christmas song. And it's a hidden art, and we will talk about that in upcoming podcasts, my dear listener. It is a hidden art, and it's very hard to do. It's hard to do it well. It's hard to capture the imagination with these types of things, because you're going into a field with very defined songs that have a very defined sense of place and defined sense of memory to the listener. We will get into that, though, at a later podcast. But this is Lisa Hannigan and Lux Alma and Christmas FM. Do listen to it, because yeah, it's a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. But that is it for the Count of Monty playlist, though, this week. As always, I shall return, and in the coming week I shall delve once again deep into the Irish music scene to create new tracks for the playlist. But for now, that's it from the Count of Monty playlist, though. So it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and watching the Last Mixtape podcast. You can subscribe to us here on YouTube and on Apple and on Spotify and all those usual podcast places and spaces. You can also submit your music to me for the Count of Monty playlist, though, via stephen@thelastmixtape.com, and I'll be very sure to hand them on to the Count to see if he will delve once more deep into the Irish music scene to get us another playlist. As always, he's a very different person from me. We're not the same, so therefore I can only pass them on. But for now, that was the last Mixtape podcast. You're the listener and the viewer. I'm Stephen White. And hey, so long.